Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Anachnu ha'ebar sha'ale with the Hebrew Israelites coming to you week in and week out through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, to preach to you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, West Indians, Haitians, and Israelite foreigners. Nachamatam, Kayah, Malakat Hashemayim, Kwara, repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. First and foremost, before we get started, we're going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Ruchak, Wadash, while double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone that told us the truth and rule well. Much respect to you, bros, out there pushing the truth with all righteousness and sincere. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
All right, so as we've been going into AhlapBayath, which Ha is the, Ahlap is going into the word for oxen or cattle. All right, and Bayath goes into a house. All right, and when you put those words together, it's AhlapBayath. And it's actually where the term for alphabet comes from. Alphabet is a Greek term. All right, the alpha goes into the when it says, oh, someone is the alpha male, so called. The alpha goes into the number one, and the number one is also synonymous with or Ahlap in Hebrew. All right, the bet part. All right, they pretty much just dropped the H because in the modern Hebrew, all right, the adulterated form of Hebrew, they call it the alphabet. All right, but really it goes into AhlapBayath. But that last BET part goes into Bayath. All right, and again, it's a house. The first two characters in the Hebrew alphabet. All right, and again, it's AhlapBayath. All right, but the letter we're going into, last time we went into Na. So today, the next corresponding letter will be a Sa, and that Sa goes into the word, or that's synonymous with Samak, and Samak, which is spelled Samaka, and that last that A. The A on the ka would drop off, and it would be pronounced samak, which means support. All right, and when we break that word down, all right, sa goes into samak, which is to sustain or support. All right, the ma goes into mayam, which is water. All right, and then the last character is going to be ka, which is it corresponds with kop, which is the palm. So when you break these down, the kop goes into power, but when you have each of those characters, it's going to be support, water, and power, or sustain, water, and power. So when you put these together spiritually, it will be sustained and supported by water, giving it power. So just want to get a couple precepts, just going into this. I don't want to Zabanaya Palus. Well, this is a beautiful edification of the spirit. So can we start with let me see, Psalms chapter 119 and verse 9.
It's the book of Psalm chapter 119 and verse 9. Wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed thereunto according to thy word.
And which, going into that, all right, the first letter up there says Beth, or Bayath, all right, and that goes into a house, all right, a temple, your spirit. How can you ultimately cleanse yourself? It says by taking heed, so listening to the word, So how do we cleanse ourselves from that gross darkness, that filth that we essentially put on ourselves in the world? When we come into this truth, when we subscribe unto the Lord Yahweh Shai, ultimately we become cleansed. Yeshai, could you get Ephesians chapter 5 verse 26? Because again, going into the word for samak, it says sustained and supported by water, giving it power. So that means that we have to stay connected, to the source, who is Yahweh Shai. That's how we ultimately receive of sustainment. All right, as pursuant to Psalm the 23rd chapter.
This is Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 26, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word.
By the washing of the water by the word, so essentially, again, the elect is ultimately going to be cleansed by this word, by subscribing to the Lord Yahweh Shai, because as pursuant to second Ezra, the second chapter and the 47th verse, ultimately the elect is able to stand stiffly, all right, because they're abiding in that rock Yahweh Shai. All right, we don't see so-called Christians standing stiffly. We don't see so-called Christians cleansing themselves because they're not ultimately connected to the source. They don't have the true understanding of the scriptures. They're not being ultimately sustained. They're just surviving.
Right.
I'm gonna get this because again, we're talking about true sustainment, All right, and that sustainment is also synonymous with water. All right, so this is the word for hydroelectric power, or also known as hydropower. Hydro goes into water. So it says hydropower is a renewable energy source that generates electricity by using kinetic energy or flowing or falling water to spin a turbine connected to a generator. So we got to stay connected to the source. The brother Yeshaya had sent a video. Pretty much, it was like some still water, and the still water had it had like some organisms. It was like dead organisms.
Right.
And something that's connected to. And if you want to speak on it, bro, you can.
No, I mean, you're pretty much going into it, whenever you have stagnant water, what it breeds is a nesting ground for disease, for parasites, for different viruses. And, in that video, it showed, if you drink, even a little bit of that water, how it can do like some very bad damage to your body,
Hmm.
with all the infections that you can get, just through that water. But, you compare it to, flowing water. When you look at flowing water, like you mentioned, it has that kinetic energy, which uh, brings life into that water. It oxygenates the
Hmm.
water. You know what I'm saying? But
Right.
with stagnant water, you have little to no oxygen, which oxygen is pretty much is needed for life. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? But you got it, bro.
Right. We got to stay we got to stay connected to that source. We notice with a lot of times Esau use dams or different little things with turbines and stuff to get energy from water systems, and that's symbolic. That's similar to that's what we gotta do in the spirit. We gotta stay connected to that water source. Could we get John chapter 4 and verse 9 to verse 15? I'm gonna finish reading this though. It says this process relies on continuous water cycle, which is driven by solar energy, ensuring the fuel, in parentheses, water, is not consumed or eliminated in the process. Hydropower facilities can range from large-scale impoundment dams to smaller runoff river systems and pump storage facilities that act as energy storage solutions. So that's ultimately the Lord Yahweh Shai is ultimately again how we receive of our sustainment and stability and support. Because we got to stay connected to something that is going to drive that kinetic energy. That kinetic energy is something that's continuously moving, and that allows for change and transformation. I'm gonna get this too before we get that. Another Google search. It says, I put in Google AI overview. How can hydropower be looked at spiritually? It says, from a spiritual perspective, hydropower can be seen as an expression of water's natural symbolism of flow, adaptability, renewal, and life-giving force, in which we got to flow. Scriptures say in Bon Sirach, the 4th chapter, 26th verse, force not the course of the river. We ultimately have to stay flowing with the scriptures. It says flow, adaptability. We got to follow the spirit. We got to be able to maneuver with the spirit. Because those that ultimately, when you liken it unto a tree, the trees that ultimately don't bend, and they're very stiff. They can't go along with the storm. Those are the ones that are destroyed. The ones that are able to bend a little bit. A lot of times they be the ones that ultimately survive. Because they're very adaptable. It says renewal. We got to become that new creature in the Lord Yahweh Shai. It says in life-giving force, channel and utilized for human benefit. This perspective often involves a recognition of the inherent spiritual essence or spirit of water and rivers. It says key spiritual interpretations include harnessing natural flow and energy. Hydropower is generated by harnessing the persistent natural flow of water, which spiritually can symbolize the ability to flow with the rhythms of life following the spirit. Embrace change and channel consistent effort towards profound transformation and progress. Scriptures say, examine ourselves daily, because we got to go from glory to glory. It says transformation and vitality. All right, we got Ephesians the 5th chapter, and we also got Psalms 119 and 9, wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way by taking heed thereto according to thy word. When you go into transformation, that goes to some type of change. We're ultimately able to change for the better in the Lord Yahweh Shai by subscribing to the scriptures. Deuteronomy the 4th chapter. It says vitality. All right, vitality goes into vitality is just something that's living. Because again, as we mentioned, we can't live off of something that's going to sit still. We have to have that kinetic energy force. All right, it says the conversion of water's kinetic energy into electricity can can be viewed as physical manifestation of water's transformative power. In indigenous teachings, following flowing water naturally absorbs an electrical charge that carries nutrients and sustains life, an electrical essence that connects all living beings. The power generated can thus be seen as a form of this vital energy being utilized to support modern human life and development. Bob Kushal, could we get Zechariah 10 and verse 4 and get that word for Neil?
Mm-hmm. This is Zechariah 10
We
and
just
verse
get
4.
we can just get the word.
Okay, Khan. So the word for nail,
Mm-hmm.
Zechariah 10 and 4, is, let me see,
Yathar.
Yathar, Khan. And it says a pin, stake, peg, nail, going down, nail, paddle, pin, stake. Um, it says a pin, a nail, which is fixed into a wall, especially a pin of a tent to drive in a pin or nail. Uh, it says also a nail or pin is used metaphorically of a prince of whom the care of the whole state hangs, as it were.
Right, and it's talking about the Lord Yahweh Shai, because ultimately, again, we receive stability, sustenance, and ultimate support, essentially by hanging upon the Lord Yahweh Shai. He's the trailblazer. That's how ultimately we're able to transform. That's how we're able to be, we ultimately receive of that vitality, that true life giving force.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it says, because reading it back, it says the power generated can thus be seen as a form of this vital energy being utilized to support modern human life, but it's not talking about, in the spiritual sense, we understand that it's talking about the elect. It says human life and development. It says interconnectedness. Or I'm going to skip down. It says balancing creation and impact. It says the duality of water's power, its ability to nurture life and immense force that can shape environments. It says mirrors the spiritual need to maintain a balanced relationship between the human needs and natural world. And which, again, more specifically in this lesson, I just want to go into how the character Sa goes into a support, in which all the characters in AhlapBayath in the alphabet are ultimately a reflection, or they mirror the Lord Yahweh Shai. They're all spiritual traits and characteristics that shape the Lord Yahweh Shai. And this, ultimately the Lord Yahweh Shai is where we find sustainment, support, and as we got in Zechariah the 10th chapter in the 4th verse, that word for nail, that's ultimately, what we hang on, because the thing about a nail, you'll fasten something to a wall, where that whole whatever that fixture or whatever is fastened on that wall, the nail is what's going to keep it in place. The nail is what's going to keep it established, and then the nail is where it finds its support.
Mm-hmm. Precept real quick.
Mm-hmm.
It's Psalm 55 and verse 22. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. He shall never suffer the righteous to be moved. Right? So that's what, as the brother's going into. This is what we're doing, man. Right? We're putting all our trust, right? We're leaning fully upon Yahweh Shai.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're putting all the weighty matters, right? Yahweh Shai is our first go-to, man.
Right. Could we also get we get John chapter 4 and verse 9?
Mm-hmm.
You start from
Bear with me.
verse 7 and go down to verse 15.
So John chapter.
Salakia. Okay, Salakia.
I got this all that.
Yeah, John 4 and 7 down to verse 15.
Okay. John 4 and 7. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Yahweh Shai saith unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans.
And she didn't know that she was talking unto the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Verse 10. Yahweh answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of the Most High, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water.
Mm-hmm.
The woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle?
And what she thought that she was actually from the chosen lineage. She wasn't actually the chosen lineage. It was some transplants that
Right.
was in Atlanta at that time. Oh yeah, Shy, you know where it's at in Kings? I think it's like Second Kings 17 or something.
Yeah, yeah. God. Let me get to it.
Can we get that account?
God.
If I could make a point on she didn't understand that what that living water was as he was speaking,
Mhm.
right? She didn't know that he was speaking, parabolically.
Right,
She was focused on the physical water, right? And that's what we're seeing today is people, they don't see the living waters being presented to them, right? They don't see the Lord speaking through his men, offering them that living water, right? They're just looking at the carnal sense.
right.
Mhm. God, I got it for you. This is Second Kings 17. I'm gonna start at verse 21. It says, "For he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drave Israel from following the Lord, and made them sin a great sin. For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They departed not from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. Then the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cutha, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof."
Right. So pretty much that she was a transplant. She wasn't Jake. She thought that she came from the righteous lineage. They pretty much took on they took on the traditions that they took on our traditions but they aren't actually they wasn't actually the children of the Lord because
Right.
Jake was out of the land by that time.
Right. May I read a little bit more?
Con.
Second Kings 17 and 25, it says, uh, "And so it was at the beginning of the dwelling there that they feared not the Lord. Therefore the Lord sent lions among them, which slew some of them. Wherefore they spake to the king of Assyria, saying, The nation or the nations which thou hast removed and placed in the cities of Samaria know not the manner of the Most High, or know not the manner of the power of the land. Therefore he has sent lions among them, and behold, they slay them, because they know not the manner of the power of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, saying, Carry thither one of the priests whom ye brought from thence, and let them go and dwell there, and let them teach them the manner of God of the land." That's pretty much it. Unless you want me to go more.
Kind of. No, that was pretty much the point. They wasn't actually they wasn't from the righteous lineage, you know.
Right.
So the Lord ultimately sent judgment.
Right. Pretty much the point I wanted to get out of that though is how she was saying, how she said that Abraham was her father and all this and that.
Hmm.
Well, they were pretty much brought up in the customs, pretty much our customs and traditions and forms of worship. So years down the line, they just ended up believing that they were the original Samaritans of that land.
Right. I go back to the scripture. Surely our fathers have inherited lies. You know.
Right.
Okay. So
But yeah.
back in John chapter 4 and verse 13, and it reads, Yahushua answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again.
Right. And he actually was talking in the spirit. She didn't ultimately understand the spiritual similitude.
Mhm. But
Because
whosoever drink, oh, slide.
it's like when we actually go into she was thinking physically, because these terrestrial bodies actually need nutrients and water,
Right.
but in the spirit ultimately it's the true water are the scriptures that ultimately sustain us, because ultimately we're able to thrive by subscribing to the Lord Yahweh Shai.
Right.
Uh,
And if I may add too, this is what they call a esoteric knowledge.
Hmm.
Esoteric going into, that this is meant for only a few, a few selected people. So what he's pretty much showing there is that this water that Yahushua came with, which is ultimately wisdom, was only afforded to a certain select people, which, are the elect of the nation of Israel. You got it, bro.
Right.
Okay. It said John 4:14. But to whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life.
All right. So it says, but whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. All right, because ultimately you have a if, being that we're staying connected to the source, we're continually hydrated. We're continually able to transform. We're continually able to be vital. And again, that word for vital goes into something that has life. You know,
Mhm.
it says, "But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life." And just from that, by continually changing ourselves and following the Lord Yahweh Shai, being that He's the trailblazer, ultimately, we're going to receive of the kingdom first go around.
Mhm.
Okay. Verse
But
15. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
we can stop. We can stop it there.
Okay.
Could we get the bros have any precepts?
I
Yeah, I
got
got
one. Okay,
one. You good. You go ahead. You got it.
Con. I want to get this real quick. This is Sirach 24 and verse 29. It says, for her thoughts are more than the sea, talking about wisdom, right? It says, for her thoughts are more than the sea, and her counsels profounder than the great deep. I also came out a brook from a river, and as a conduit into a garden. I said, I will water my best garden, and will water abundantly my garden bed. And lo, my brook became a river, and my river became a sea. And ultimately, that garden, being Israel, as uh, uh, Israel's a people before a place. So us, being watered back again is ultimately us receiving of the wisdom. When you're reading Ezekiel the 37th chapter, right? Those dry bones, coming back to life, receiving the flesh and the breath, and then also in Revelation the 11th chapter, I believe it's the 11th verse, where it says, they stood up and great fear fell upon them, ultimately because, we're coming back to receiving of that esoteric knowledge that we once had from the beginning, that water, that living water that the brother went into, that's as we see in, being poured out even more and more. The more further we're getting closer to the kingdom of heaven, the more and more we're starting to see how, this knowledge is really spreading out like a flood. First it started off like rain, and then like it says right here, it started off as what does it say? It says, and lo, my brook became a river, and my river became a sea. Now we see, this truth is flooding everything. You know what I'm saying? But the point being is how this water is now actually bringing back life unto our people, as a whole. Which before back then, Jake was tapping into that stagnant water, that Christianity, that Islam, all that other nonsense. The scriptures talk about how our people uh hewn out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. That's symbolically of what they did. They took on these other wayward doctrines, other philosophies, other forms of religion, got Jake all bugged out, in the dead state of mind, you know. But like you said, pretty much going into this this lesson, this water ultimately is that refreshing, what I'm saying? It washes off all that grime and grease that we once had, but now we're being made getting built up and pretty much brought into what it is to truly live. But y'all
Mhm.
brothers got it.
Kind of real
Okay.
quick, just to add to you, Isaiah 44 and verse 3. For I will pour out water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my spirit upon thy seed, and my blessing upon thine offspring, and they shall spring up as among the grass, as willows by the watercourses. Right. So as the brother Yeshua was going into that, this water, right, this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, right, is spread throughout the earth, man. Right, and the elect are springing up, right, as those willows, man. Right, they're being, fully nourished, right? Like that living water, right? Those rivers, provide nourishment, right, to those plants, man. We being those that choice vine, as the scriptures talk about, man. You know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
I did want to get this real quick too. Jeremiah, John chapter 7 and verse 38. Let's see, it reads here: He that believeth on me, as the scripture has said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. Right. So, just going back to what the brother Yawam is going into, right? This trusting in the Lord, leaning on the Lord, right? Receiving that support, right? That sustenance from Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai gives you that living water, man. Right? And as you receive of that living water, you can spread that living water to others, man. That's
Mm-hmm.
what these video epistles are. Right? Every time you see a video pop up, that's a wellspring coming up, right, of living water through Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai.
Right.
Right. Hey, Salakia, if I may add just one more thing,
Okay, you got.
uh, I got this real quick. This is Proverbs 10 and verse 4, because as a brother kind of was going into, uh, uh, whenever if you have the water, it should pretty much like be in you to go out and spread it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not something that like we mentioned, stagnant water, it starts to brew diseases. So if you're just holding it, that water is going to eventually just start becoming infected and bugs and all kinds of shit start getting in it. But if you allow it to continue to flow, that's where that living life gets produced out of that. You know, but I want to get this real quick. This is Proverbs 10 and verse 4. It says, "He becometh poor that dealeth with slack, or with slack of hand, but the hand of the diligent make rich." You see, so ultimately, if you're sitting on your talent, you're not going to produce no fruit. You know what I'm saying? But if you are diligent, you continuously, put the work in. That's where you stack up those spiritual riches. You know, that's where you what do you say, produce. You know what I'm saying? But you got it.
Right. Because if I could add to your point, like if you just when you put it in um, when you look at the body, the body doesn't hold on to water. It ultimately it flushes it out. And going back
Hmm.
to what we got in the AI overview, it's in a continuous cycle. So when your body ingests water, all right, you go and you urinate it out, but then you go back and get some more water. So just like with this word, we're ingesting the word, all right, spiritually, and then when we go out and we preach it, and then we got to go back to the scriptures to ultimately to sustain ourselves and support ourselves spiritually, and it's a continual process, and that pushes forth life, what's known as the circle of life.
Right. Con.
Could we get uh could we get First Peter chapter 3 and verse 20 and to verse 21, and then also Psalms 23 and verse 1 to 4?
Con, I got that First Peter. You said 20.
God.
Con. This is First Peter chapter 3 and verse 20. It says, "Which sometime were disobedient, when once the long suffering of the Most High waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water." It
Hmm.
says, "The like figure whereunto even baptism doth also now save us, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience towards the Most High, by the resurrection of Yahweh Shah Mashiach."
Right. So NLT, it says First Peter 3 and 21, it says, "And that water is a picture of baptism, which now saves you, not by removing dirt from your body, but as a response to the Most High from a clean conscience. It is effective because of the resurrection of Yahweh Shai Hamashiach." And it's a similitude. Scriptures say that the Lord speaks in similitudes. So it's a picture of true baptism. True baptism ultimately is cleansing us, from those old ways that we ultimately learn in the world, and being baptized. we're ultimately able to live, by subscribing to the true vital force in the scriptures.
Mhm.
So could we get Psalms 23 and verse 1 to 4?
Psalm 23 and verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Right, and it says, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want." All right, a shepherd ultimately leads. All right, as pursuant to Ecclesiastes 12:11. It says the words of the wise are as golds, and as the nails of masters given from one shepherd, roughly paraphrasing. So ultimately, the Lord is leading us with this word, which also is synonymous with the sustainment, the support, and the water, and the wisdom, and the esoteric truth of the scriptures. So it says, the Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. And when you go into the word for want, it goes into lacking. So ultimately, by subscribing to this word, we're not lacking. All right, whereas in Job 23 and verse 12 and Deuteronomy 8 and 3, it talks about, how ultimately we receive of, true nourishment in the Lord, but uh, in the physical, all right, these terrestrial bodies, they actually need water, they actually need food. All right. On the contrary, the scriptures ultimately give us the true nourishment, all right, because these bodies are going to be nourished by physical food only, but for so long, but we ultimately receive that sustainment, that support, and that stability, all right, from the scriptures, by ultimately using the scriptures as those goals mentioned in Ecclesiastes 12:11, which a goal is something that stimulates a certain action, so by staying on these scriptures, all right, it stimulates those actions and righteousness, that we're able to live by.
Mhm.
Verse 2. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters.
And green pastures, all right, waters, all those are synonymous with life. Again, we receive of life in the scriptures.
He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake.
A true support is going to have renewal. It's going to have that rebirth. It's going to have that new creature. All right. If it's not renewing, if it's not transforming, it's not a true sustain. It's not a true support. It's not going to give you that actual power that you're looking for. It's not going to scratch that itch.
Right. Right. It's Psalm 23 and verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
It says, "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." In which America is that valley of the shadow of death. Death lurks on every corner. This is it's a place where a death style is the norm. It says, "I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff they comfort me." And being that Israel, all right, is likened to the sheep. All right, a true sheep, all right, is going to abide and and trust and have confidence in the shepherd, because the shepherd got the rod and the staff. So it's a spiritual similitude being made here. Because that rod and that staff, all right, if it was an animal, if it was a bear or a lion, that shepherd is going to take that staff and do what he got to do to keep him up off the sheep. I'm gonna get this word for staff. All right, and it says this word for staff. It says masha aina, and it says support of every kind. It says staff. All right, I'm gonna get this root word, which it goes into masha ain. It says support, staff. All right, it says support of every kind. As it is said a little after of food and drink. Verse 1, also the chief persons of a nation on whom they lean. All right, and that's the Lord Yahweh Shai, in which he comes in the volume of the book. So just showing that the rod and the staff is talking about the scriptures. All right, and it's also synonymous with the true support and the true sustenance. Could we get Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 20? And after that, I ain't had nothing else.
If I could add to you real quick too,
Uh,
that staff being this word, right? What's the staff used for? Correction, guidance, and protection, right? And that's what we're getting through these scriptures, man. Right, through this wisdom, knowledge, understanding, we get corrected, right? But we're also receiving that protection from the Lord, right? We're also receiving that guidance, man. You know.
Mhm. Khan, this
all
is
right, that's a lot. My bad, bro. You said that we're receiving of the guidance, because also in the Hebrew alphabet, AhlapBayath, the rod and the staff, again, it goes into sustenance, support, but then also we get the guidance, we get the correction, because if you have a sheep and he keeps hopping, it was a video on Instagram, it was a sheep, he kept hopping into uh, like a ditch, all right, and the shepherd would go, he would pull him out, all right, and then he'll hop right back into it, and that's essentially what the Lord does, and that's why a lot of times, a staff would have that little hook on it, so you can just pull the sheep out of danger. But then the Hebrew character la, or the letter la, goes into it goes into to, or toward, which that's guidance, because if the sheep didn't know where to go, the shepherd will point, hey, we're going to this direction. All right, and that's why la is also for to and towards, because that's where the sheep will look to for direction. The shepherd will say, hey, you need to go this way or go this way. That's essentially what the Lord is doing in the spirit. Don't go here, don't go here, go this way. That's why when we went to water, it said that it had to follow a certain flow. Force not the course of the river. We got to follow the spirit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Con. This is Isaiah 10 and verse 20. And it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel and such as are escaped of the house of Jacob shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, but shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth.
So it says, subtitle in the BLB, it says a remnant will return. Verse 20, it says, and it shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Yasharallah and such as are escaped of the house of Ya'iqwab shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, talking about Esau Edom, because what Esau Edom feeds is a whole bunch of bullshit, a whole bunch of deception, and things that are ultimately going to put us, all right, to where we're not going to ultimately be at our fullest potential. All right, he's going to give things that's going to keep us at the lowest base level. All right, Christianity, all right, our diets, our lifestyles, rap, all right, things that are fed to Jacob's culture. These things are detrimental to the health of us, as sheep. So it says, and it shall come to pass that in that day that the remnant of Yasharallah and such as are escaped of the house of Ya'iqwab shall no more stay again upon him that smote them, or our oppressor Esau Edom, or in the other heathen. It says, but shall stay upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. All right, the elect is staying upon the Lord, all right, in truth. We're ultimately abiding in the Lord Yahweh Shai, all right, and we're receiving that sustenance as we got in Isaiah the 44th chapter. Could we go back to that?
Con.
Because Isaiah 44, it pretty much goes into, we can start at verse 3, how, we are sustained by that water. Water is going to allow for life and growth.
It's Isaiah 44 and verse 3. For I will pour out water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my spirit upon thy seed, and my blessing upon thine offspring. And they shall spring up as among the grass, as willows by the watercourses.
Talking about the camps, pretty much the Lord is ultimately raising up the elect. And that's why we see bros, pretty much prophesying across the four corners of the globe.
Okay.
We can go down to verse 5.
Yeah. Isaiah 44 and 5. One shall say, I am the Lord's, and another shall call himself by the name of Jacob, and another shall subscribe with his hand unto the Lord, and surname himself by the name of Israel.
One shall subscribe with his hand unto the Lord, and one shall call himself by the name of Ya'iqwab, roughly paraphrasing. And that's what's happening, and that's ultimately where we see life thriving. All right, because before Jake was lost. Jake was saying, oh, they was Jake was saying they was Hispanic, Native American, Black. All right, and these things ain't really have no type of it didn't have no benefits. All right, it ultimately kept us enslaved. All right, that's why scriptures say that we ultimately are free. We're liberated. All right, when we learn of this truth, it's in the New Testament somewhere, but pretty much we're liberated. All right, being that we're liberated, we're ultimately able to live. All right, because when we subscribe to being an Israelite, that's where we live. Because when you look at like the animal kingdom, all right, Esau will call a dog. He'll call it a dog, or excuse me, he'll call a dog, which really in Hebrew is kalab. All right, but when you say dog, really he put the O there, and really it should be an A, but that's actually the vibration of a fish in Hebrew. All right, and by calling a dog that, it's taking the life force away from what it really does. When you go into the Hebrew word for kalab, all right, ultimately it's giving life to that actual creation, so that it can do forth for its job. Because when you go into Hebrew, when you call something its name, that gives it life. All right, when we call ourselves black, all right, Native American, Latino, Hispanic, all right, that duels the vibration. All right, when we say, okay, we're Israelites, all right, we're the people of the Most High, all right, well, that comes with a vibration, that comes with a responsibility, and that holds us accountable so that we can ultimately live, thrive, all right, and sustain ourselves, as we got in Isaiah the 10th chapter and the 20th verse. We're standing upon the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, that's pretty much all I have, bros. And Hannah,
I have one more precept, if I may.
kind you got it.
This is Sirach 29 and verse 21. It says, "The chief thing for life is water and bread and clothing and a house to cover shame." Now, all these things, have pretty much have a thing in common, that these are all representative of wisdom, representative of, you know, um, what is necessary for your body in order to, in order for life, right? But it says water, right? We understand water is representative of wisdom, bread, clothing as well. It talks about, put on that beautiful garment, so Jerusalem, the house, going into that one man who, that parable of the one who built his house upon a rock, pretty much somebody who's going to use wisdom to build, what I'm saying, and surround himself, with that protection. But like it says right here, though, the chief thing for life is water, right? And as we went into, how water, which is, Yahweh Shai, but ultimately, but also wisdom, you know, uh, this is how this has been reintroduced back into our lives. Like we've been going into this lesson, what I'm saying, it has been reintroduced into us. So now we're seeing, you know, life being uh, 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 brought forth into the forefront, and all this wickedness being pushed to the side. You know, like the elders say, wickedness is out, righteousness is in. You know what I'm saying? This old ways of how Jake used to live and behave, and especially the mindset that Jake used to have, all that shit, man, is being washed away, and it's all due to this word, man. It's beautiful to see, brothers coming, from different walks of life, and now coming to the truth, coming to, their origin, what I'm saying? And as us, coming back into to living again, into the land of the living, as they say, now we're starting to see, you know, uh, uh, the enemy, start really being in this wavery position, because he understands, as I quoted earlier, Revelation 11 and 11, now great fear is falling upon him, So, but now what he's trying to do is he's trying to take away that water source, by so-called debunking us and doing all these different tactics of clipping brothers' channels, videos, what I'm saying? Soon it's going to be to the point where you ain't going to be able to hear this word, you know? So the point being is to, get this water while you still can. The watering trough is open, man. You got to come and drink. Otherwise, once that hole is covered, that's it, man. You know, that whole water of life, it ain't going to be out there, like it is now, you know? That's pretty much it, bro.
Kind. I got one more, because we had quoted it. This is Second Ezra chapter 2 and verse 47, and it says, "So he answered me." I'm gonna start at verse. I start at verse 44. Second Ezra chapter 2 and verse 44, and it says, "So I asked the angel and said, Sir, what are these? He answered and said unto me, These be they that have put off the mortal clothing." All right, as we got in Psalms 119 and 9, Ephesians 5 and 26. All right, these are they that have put off the mortal clothing and have put on the immortal, stand upon the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, and in truth. It says, and have confessed the name of the Most High. Now are they crowned and receive palms. Then said I unto the angel, What young person is this? Excuse me. What young person is it that crowneth them? And he giveth them palms in their hands. So he answered and said unto me, It is the Son of the Most High, whom they have confessed in the world. Then began I greatly to commend them that stood so stiffly for the name of the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai. And ultimately we're able again to stand stiffly in the Lord Yahweh Shai, because we're standing upon that rock. Whereas, in Matthew the 7th chapter, all right, had the two foundations. All right, you had the ones that ultimately stood on that faulty foundation. All right, they built their house on that sand. All right, when the different adversities came, they were swept away, greatly destroyed. They fell. All right, but we're able to ultimately stand in the Lord Yahweh Shai, because that's the true support, that's the true stay, that's the true water and transforming power.
Con.
Bros, have anything else?
La.
Way I don't want to Zaza about Naya Palos. What that was a beautiful edification through the spirit. Wa I don't want to Zaza Dam Yashi I want to Wa. Lord's will, you have a good day. Wa Shalom.com, which is peace and to all. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.